Hi, and welcome back to another lesson. Today we're going to look at how to harmonize a particular melody. Harmonize just means selecting chords. To do this, I've selected a brief sound clip from a sample pack by Dropgun Samples. This is a house sample pack, and let's have a brief listen to the audio itself without any chords before we progress forward.
Doors open if you wanna play. I won't say no if you wanna stay. Kiss me please man, touch me tease man. It's so easy. It's so easy.
Now the first thing to pay attention to is that this melody is in the key of A. I'm not going to commit to major or minor yet for reasons that will become apparent. Now the first thing we're going to try is to just play an A minor chord over the entire melody. Of course, this is not very sophisticated or interesting, but it just goes to show you that sometimes something very simple just works. Have a listen.
Doors open if you wanna play. I won't say no if you wanna stay. Kiss me please man, touch me tease man. It's so easy. It's so easy.
Now we're going to explore different ways of making this progression more complex and coming up with ideas for doing so. The number one rule when harmonizing a melody is selecting chords that clash as little as possible with the melody notes. This is called consonance, to contrast it with dissonance, which is when the chord notes clash with the melody. Now, there's no right or wrong way of harmonizing something. This is just a general guiding rule, and as you'll see, we'll actually break it a little bit as we go on. Now, the first thing I'll note is that for an A minor pentatonic scale, there are a couple of chords that clash very little with any of the notes of the A minor pentatonic scale. These are A minor, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, and G major. Really now, pretty much any combination of these chords in any order would probably sound pretty good, or at least okay, over this melody. To demonstrate this, let me just play out one such progression where I almost chose chords at random.
Doors open if you wanna play. I won't say no if you wanna stay. Kiss me please man, touch me tease man. It's so easy. It's so easy.
The reason these chords work so well over the minor pentatonic scale is that either the chord notes themselves or their higher extensions or tensions, as they're called, consists of notes in the scale. So let's look at one such sample chord, the F major chord, which is made out of the notes F, A, and C. Now major chords also have extensions, so you could play an F major 7th chord, which would add the E, an F major 9th chord, which would add the G, and you could also add a 13th degree, which is a D. So if you look at the totality of these notes, F, A, C, E, G, and D, you really get all of the notes in the A minor pentatonic scale. Something that ties nicely into this idea is the idea of relative minor chords. This refers to the ability to substitute or exchange any major chord you see with a minor chord that is 3 semitones below it. So for example, you can exchange a C major with an A minor, an F major with a D minor, or a G major with an E minor. To see how this plays out with the current melody, let me play you first a progression that goes from F major to G major to A minor.
Doors open if you want. tease me. It's so easy. It's so easy.
Now let's take some of the major chords we've played, namely F major and G major, and change them in select locations to their minor relative counterparts. F major will become D minor, and G major will become E minor.
Doors open if you wanna play. I won't say no if you wanna stay. Kiss me, tease me, touch me, tease me. It's so easy. It's so easy.
This is a process called reharmonization. Once you have a harmonic progression in place, you can think of ways of changing the chords in it. Now, some of the times we can borrow chords from what's called parallel keys. Since we're in the key of A, we can also take chords from the key of A major. A major is comprised of A major, B minor, C sharp minor, D major, E major, F sharp minor, G sharp diminished, and A major again. For example, we can borrow the D major chord and throw it in with the other chords we already know will work: A minor, C major, F major, and G major. This also works because D major doesn't really clash directly almost with any of the notes in our melody.
Doors open if you wanna play. I won't say no if you wanna stay. Kiss me, tease me, touch me, tease me. It's so easy. It's so easy.
Now, remember I told you that your goal is to maximize consonance, to minimize the amount of clashing between the chord tones and the melody tones. Well, it turns out that you can break this rule sometimes and still make things sound pretty good. This ties in to the fact that our melody is in the A minor pentatonic scale. Minor pentatonic scales are used all the time in blues music to solo over major chord changes. For example, it's not uncommon to use the A minor pentatonic scale to solo over the A major blues progression, which consists of the chords A major, D major, and E major. You'll note, for example, that the A major chord has the notes A, C sharp, and E in it, and C sharp clashes with the melody tones. It clashes with C major. Nevertheless, combining them still produces, in my opinion, a pleasing sound, even though it has a little bit of dissonance. Let's have a listen.
Doors open if you wanna play. I won't say no if you wanna stay. Kiss me, tease me, touch me, tease me. It's so easy. It's so easy.
So far, we've looked at fairly simple chords. Now, the entire progression gets a different character if we use chord with extensions with higher degrees. For example, 7th chords, major 7th chords, or dominant 7th chords, 9th chords, and so on. Take a listen at how the same progression we've just played previously sounds when we exchange some of the chords for major 7th chords.
Doors open if you wanna play. I won't say no if you wanna stay. Kiss me, tease me, touch me, tease me. It's so easy. It's so easy.
This progression somewhat increases the tension or the clash or the dissonance between the chords and the melody. As I've said, some dissonance is not necessarily a bad thing. As we use higher degree tensions in the chords, the progression sounds more jazzy, in a sense. Whether or not that's a good thing is really up to you. It's a matter of personal preference. I personally happen to like this sort of tension in my progressions. Let me show you another trick with higher degree tensions on chords. And we're going to use sus chords in this case. Let's look at a D minor 11th chord. Now this chord is made out of the notes D, F, A, C, E, and G. When we play a sus or suspended version of it, we take the third degree, which is the F, and move it up a whole tone to a G. This kind of makes it ambiguous. Is it a major chord or a minor chord? The thing that separates between the major and minor chords is either using an F for the minor D or an F sharp for a D major. These sus chords have a very distinct character that again increases the amount of tension in the progression itself and between the progression and the melody.
Doors open if you wanna play. I won't say no if you wanna stay. Kiss me, please, man. Touch me, tease, man. It's so easy. It's so easy.
Notice a few things about the progression I've just played. First, it makes extensive use of suspended chords. Notice how towards the end, however, I return to using more simple chords. This is to give the progression a feel of a definitive ending. You could substitute any of the suspended chords with their non-suspended counterparts, and the progression will also sound quite appealing. You might have noticed that I snuck in there a particular B minor chord, or actually a B suspended chord. Again, this is a borrowed chord from the parallel A major scale. Just like we borrowed the D major, we can also borrow the B minor. Again, you have to be careful when borrowing this sort of chord so it doesn't clash with any of the melody notes. There has been some minimal amount of clashing in what I've played, but in my personal opinion, it is acceptable and it sort of fits in with the slightly modern sound of the progression. Again, your mind might vary. Now, I hope this video has given you some ideas on how to approach the harmonization of melodies, what to look out for, how to borrow chords, how to make sure that chords don't clash with melodies, maybe using relative minors in some cases, and generally sort of coming to terms with the fact that there's no right way or wrong way of harmonizing a melody. There are some rules that you should be aware of and practice and get comfortable with, but really there's no right way of going about it. It's only a matter of being aware of the tension between the dissonance and the consonance of the progression versus the melody. With that being said, I hope you've learned something interesting, and I'll see you next time.